Have you ever signed in to your social media accounts and started browsing through all the cute little pictures of puppies and kittens and pets that are just so adorable that you think, all I need in my life is a pet? If I get this little cute dog, I'm going to be happy. I'll have a dog who's going to love me and give me attention and be just the greatest thing. Well, there's another side to this that many pet owners do not think about before they get involved with pet ownership, and that has to do with the costs of owning a pet. In today's video, we're going to talk about the three main categories of expenses that you'll come across as a pet owner, and some of the things that you just don't think about until it's too late. So the very first expense that you'll come across is the upfront cost for your pet. This is the fee that you pay to acquire the pet, whether that be a dog or a cat. You usually know what this cost is. It's clearly advertised and it's a fixed amount. It can be through an adoption agency as a donation. It can be for a very specific breed and a very high amount if you're buying a dog. The range is incredibly wide and it depends on what type of animal you're bringing into your home. This is a known cost usually, so you're expecting it and you think all I need to do is manage for this one individual expense. On top of that, for your upfront costs, you need to consider vet visits. So you'll have to get the pet into the vet. There are oftentimes vaccinations that accompany pets. So you'll need to make sure that you're accounting for those expenses. And if it's a puppy or a kitten, there are a series of shots that have to happen up front. Then you have to think about neutering or spaying your animal. These expenses can add a lot to that upfront cost. I would say anywhere from $300 to $700 you're going to be adding immediately. If you do have to get a spay or a neuter done in the first year or so, you'll expect to pay much more. You'll need to check with your local vet to really appreciate what this might cost, but in my experience, it's between $1,000 and $2,000. So think about this expense up front and be prepared for it. The next cost category has to do with ongoing expenses. These expenses range from food, toys, all the way to pet gear for walking your animal, any sort of lessons that you deem are necessary if you intend to train your animal, if you have daycare requirements, and you don't want to leave your animal in a home for a long period of time while you work. These are your ongoing fixed costs. This is relatively easy to calculate. However, there are some surprises that sometimes come along with these fixed costs. They can change over time depending on dietary needs of the animal and other things that pop up through time. You'll also want to include here vet visits. I typically take my dogs in every year at the very least for an annual checkup. I make sure that they have the latest vaccinations that are required by law, but also that will keep them safe. Medication is a big part of this. Heartworm and flea and tick medication is imperative where I live. It depends on where you live. Sometimes you can get away with not using flea and tick medication, but typically heartworm is mandatory almost anywhere you are if you want to keep your pet safe. Other animals have other requirements, so you'll want to look into the individual pet that you're looking to bring into the home and understand that there are costs associated with medication, and these are rather expensive. If you're not expecting it, you might find yourself dropping $300 to $500 a year to cover these expenses on top of any vaccinations that you'll have to do. And that's usually on a cycle of every 2 years, depending on the animal. The final expense category I like to call the emergency or surprise category. This is what no one thinks about. There are oftentimes medical emergencies. I have 2 dogs. They love to eat things. They love to play around with snakes, with other dangerous spiders, scorpions, anything that they can find. They don't exactly know what they're dealing with until they've dealt with it once and learn a lesson, but that lesson can be very expensive. A good friend of mine had a dog off leash out in the foothills where I live, and this dog was running around and encountered a rattlesnake. Rattlesnakes are not very friendly and oftentimes won't attack unless provoked, but the dog was very curious, heard the rattle, and approached it. Thought maybe I'll just play around with this thing that's making noise. Long story short, the dog was bitten by the rattlesnake, and anti-venom can be extremely expensive. In this case, I think it was well over $2,000 to save the dog. There are courses that dogs can take to learn about rattlesnakes as an example, but that would need to go into your fixed regular costs or your upfront costs, depending on how you decide to spread out those expenses. There are other emergencies that happen with pets. Anyone who's had a pet knows that sometimes if they're not feeling well, you can feel like you need to get them into an ER visit. These types of emergencies seem to always happen on the weekend. You find yourself just scouring the internet for emergency options, and you land at a local emergency vet clinic. If you've ever been to one of these clinics, you know that the prices are exorbitant. You have no idea how much you're going to spend, but it's your pet and you're going to do what it takes to make sure they're safe. Oftentimes they find nothing wrong with your pet. Maybe they ate something funny. There are lots of reasons you can end up in the ER with your animal, and usually it's a very expensive trip. So please keep this in mind. If you love your pets, you're likely going to worry about them and you're going to take them in, and this is going to be expensive. Now, there are options to help you with unexpected expenses, primarily pet insurance. In fact, at your vet, they likely offer a pet insurance option. If your budget is really tight and you don't have any emergency fund built up for an emergency with your animal, then I would recommend considering budgeting for this monthly expense for pet insurance. If you really do want to take the best care of your pet and you don't want to have to think long and hard about an emergency before you go in, this can be a great peace of mind offering from an insurance company. It's not usually terribly expensive, so as long as you're putting it into your monthly budget, you understand how it fits, and you're willing to commit to that up front, this can be a much better option than having to deal with an emergency. Some people have different ideas about what is appropriate when it comes to medical expenses for animals. And of course, this is your prerogative to decide how much you'll spend and when you'll spend it. But if you are a loving and devoted pet owner, insurance is always an option, or having enough money set aside for this type of emergency. When it comes to pet ownership, I often find that the people who are least prepared to own pets are those who have them. They go out, they pick up a dog, or they pick up a cat, and they really don't think through the financial implications. The solutions for this animal are not great. The family may neglect the pet, not give it the care that it needs, and then ultimately the pet suffers and has a very poor quality of life. I suggest you do your research. Make sure that having a pet in your life is something that fits with your vision, fits with the way that you want to live. In my case, I couldn't imagine life without dogs. I've had them for nearly my entire life, and they play a huge role in my day-to-day living. I devote a lot of money to my pets, but not all people are able to devote that amount of money. If you are one of those people who doesn't want to spend that kind of money, know that surprises are very possible and very likely, and you'll need to make that decision up front. Finally, I just want to say that for anyone looking in to getting a pet of any kind, you really need to make sure that this is a decision you're willing to commit to for the next 10 plus years. Although it seems very short when you love your pet, it's also a pretty extreme commitment for those who are not sure what they're getting into. If you look at your upfront costs, you add that to your annual fixed yearly costs, and then you factor in some amount for emergencies, whether that be upfront by paying for insurance or having a fund set aside so that you can handle these emergencies. This total is a tremendous amount of money and an amount that you'll have to commit to for the expected duration of the pet's life. So please take your time, do the research, make sure that you have enough money to afford an animal. Animals deserve all of the care that they need in their lives. They deserve a shelter. They deserve food and water and attention and training and everything else that comes along with pet ownership. So make sure that you bring a pet into your home in a safe and secure way, and think through the financial implications before you go out and see that cute little puppy face that you can't resist and you decide on a whim to pick up that puppy without really doing the research. Thank you for listening today. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat below. I'll be sure to get back to you. Otherwise, like and subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.